Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I am Thom. I am a consultant with the Gateway Academy team at CGAP, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. I wish to thank you for taking the time to join us and look forward to your engagement throughout the hour. I also want to thank the CGAP's Microfinance Gateway team for hosting this session. So today I'm joined by a team of 3 panelists from whom we'll be hearing in the next few minutes. And they'll be addressing the topic of how financial institutions in Sub-Saharan Africa are tackling the issue of employee development and retention using online learning. So before we go further, I want to go through a few of key logistics. As you know, this is an audio broadcast, and your microphones will remain muted throughout the entire session. However, I really want to encourage you to ask questions as we go along throughout the webinar. I would like to ask you to use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen and use that to submit your question at any time. You'll notice that you can send that to different participants. So for me to be able to see your question or your comment, please select all participants from the drop-down menu when you're sending in your question. The webinar will be recorded, and that recording will be sent to you and all registrants following the session in the next few days. And I also want to ask you to please participate as we go along. We have a few poll questions that we'd like to hear from you as, with your response. So next, I would like to introduce our panelists. You're going to be hearing from Thom Sinclair, who is our Senior Operations Officer at the Gateway Academy. Next, you'll also be hearing from Noelah Bomani. Noelah is a Learning and Talent Development Manager at NMB Bank in Tanzania. NMB Bank is Tanzania's largest financial institution. In addition to Thom and Noelah, we're also joined by Jessica Stewart, who is the Head of Consulting and Research at Creative Metier. And she'll be talking to us about how Creative Metier is also working with the Gateway Academy to build our community of practice in addition to the topic on hand today. So I wish to welcome the panelists. Thank you in advance for sharing your insights with us on the topic. And next, let me give you a quick outline of the webinar. What can you expect to take away today? We will cover these topics. Thom will start with an overview of what Gateway Academy does and provide us some context for experience. And he'll also address some of the trends in Sub-Saharan Africa's financial sector, the growth, skill needs, and capacity gaps that Gateway Academy is working to address. We will also hear from Jessica about the Sub-Saharan sector's financial sector employment market and factors that are driving retention and supporting employee development. Noelah will speak to us about the case of NMB Bank Tanzania, where she works, and as our featured financial service provider, she will discuss how other financial institutions like NMB are tackling employee development and retention challenges. Thom will wrap up the session speaking to us about 5 key business challenges that organizations face that are related to employee development and how Gateway Academy is supporting financial service providers towards tackling these challenges. And obviously, you'll also be talking about how your organization may be able to benefit and work with us. So that's our webinar outline that our panelists will take us through next. But first, before they do, let's learn a little bit more about you. I would like to find out who's joined us for this session. And so let's take a moment and please respond to the next 2 poll questions that you will see on your screen next. So pause for a second while we wait for you to respond. And once you respond to the 2 questions, please click on Submit. All right, a few more seconds, and then Thom will guide us through the next portion of our presentation.
Thank you, Panina. And as those poll results come in, are you able to tell me what they look like?
Not yet. Give me a second.
Okay, I'll give you a second.
Okay.
In the meantime, because that'll just help me know how to address this next couple of slides. But the first couple of slides are on CGAP and Gateway Academy. And so I'm going to assume most people understand what CGAP is, and that CGAP is housed at the World Bank, and that our vision is a world that has access to and can use financial services to improve their lives. And we do this by spurring innovation and advancing knowledge and solutions that promote responsible, sustainable, inclusive financial markets. And Gateway Academy certainly does that. Gateway Academy is a project between CGAP and MasterCard Foundation. We're an innovative learning project that has created a curated online marketplace. And our courses in this marketplace are geared towards financial service provider staff. In addition to courses, we're also working on cultivating communities of practice. Currently, we're working in 7 countries. We're working in Ghana and West Africa, and then we're working in East and Southern Africa, as you can see, Kenya and Tanzania, Rwanda, Uganda, Malawi, and Zambia. This is where we're building partnerships with financial service providers, where we are building relationships with training and content providers. But now that we're online, we're actually open to working with anyone. But that's where we're building those partnerships. And when we looked across this particular region, we noticed that there was a capacity gap. And that's why we started this work, because there's a gap that exists in financial inclusion among financial service providers, policymakers, and other stakeholders. We decided to start with financial service providers and build Gateway Academy to address those needs. So the market for capacity building or training for financial service providers in financial inclusion is not working. The current state is not able to scale up to meet the market needs. And when we talk to financial service providers, they express that they want to increase the effectiveness of training in capacity building services. So we want to build out that market. But currently, there are these one-on-one relationships between training service providers and financial service providers that don't allow for that scale up. So what we are doing is working on both the supply and the demand side to increase the relationships between these training service providers and these financial service providers. By doing that, we are creating a market where financial service providers have access to multiple training and content providers, and training and content providers can have access to multiple financial service providers, creating a market that can mature and grow and that is healthy both on the supply and the demand side. So I'm getting a message from Panina that most people did not attend the first webinar or aren't too familiar with CGAP. So when we get to the Q&A, if there are things that I missed or things that you'd like to hear more about, just let me know. So as we create this healthy market, both on the supply and the demand side, Gateway Academy does this by bringing a number of things. So we've created the marketplace that's online. So we've created the infrastructure that is the platform. We're working on market facilitation, both on the supply side with training and content providers, and on the demand side with financial service providers. We're curating that content to make sure it's quality and make sure that it fits the in-demand needs of financial service providers. And we're building capacity, both on the supply and the demand side. And with training providers, we're helping them build their capacity to take their content and move it online to an online learning format that works well for learners. And for financial service providers, we are helping them think through how to integrate online learning into their offering. So at this point, let's look across the sector where we're working. There are over 200 million people between the ages of 15 and 24 in Sub-Saharan Africa. And 60% of graduates are out of work. So there are a lot of people who are young who are looking for jobs. Correspondingly, there is a growth in the financial sector, and that includes the financial inclusion sector. And with that growth, of course, comes an increase in employee recruitment. Those employees, of course, have to be trained. And as we look across what the picture of new hires look like in that sector, you'll see that 75% of the new hires come with no experience. Of course, we have this huge youth range, 15 to 24, 200 million people. So many of them don't have experience at all. And even the next segment, you'll see 20% of them only have between 1 and 3 years of experience. It's only when you get to the last 5% that you have the mid and senior level new hires. So there's a lot of demand for training, and yet over 50% of the banks are not happy with their current training offering. And that's why we built Gateway Academy, to address that gap and to be able to scale up the capacity building efforts. There are many factors that go into this, as Penina mentioned. These are 4 plus a sort of an other category of factors that we heard from financial service providers. Time constraints, no surprise, training takes time. Cost and budget constraints, and those, of course, go hand in hand. Then there are also issues with content and quality of the training. There's also a lack of strategic focus on much of the training. And then there's kind of an other bucket that is important, but includes other reasons why it's not able to quite scale up. We're going to circle back to these constraints at the end of the webinar, and as Penina said, talk about how Gateway Academy, how we can address these particular constraints. But at this point, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Jessica Stewart at Creative Metier.
And I work with Creative Metier, and I lead our research and consulting work to support organizational development in FSPs in support of their financial inclusion strategies. We are also leading the HR community of practice for HR leaders of the Gateway Academy's initial implementing partners. So what are some of the characteristics of the Sub-Saharan African financial sector employment market that we see? What we observe is that the employment market is highly competitive in most countries, less so in Kenya at present due to the interest rate cap, which is causing staff retrenchments in banks. There is a shortage of key skills, including technical, product development, managerial leadership, critically data analytics, and digital. There are a number of new entrants to the market, potentially offering very high salaries: telcos, international competitors, multinational banks, and other actors. And also headhunting firms are proactively managing the industry talent pool and driving movement. So how can institutions respond positively to this? Our observations are that the key factors driving retention lie mostly within the control of the institution. This visual shares the factors that we observe driving retention in the priority order which our work across organizations has identified them. It's interesting to note that the existence of an opportunity or job offer elsewhere is not the salient driving force. An employer can substantially mitigate the risk of attrition by focusing on the factors outlined above that, including, for example, career development, personal growth, job expansion, and variety. We observe that most employers need to be proactive in providing new opportunities, because whilst most of their high flyers are being regularly approached from outside, staff are often not well informed about internal opportunities. Often, the first meaningful career conversation is with a headhunter. A number of headhunters provide training, career support, and essentially rotational development. Institutions which mirror this internally can start to mitigate the risk of staff attrition. We find that staff looking to exit in the short term are often doing so due to lack of challenge in their current role. Those who are looking to exit in the medium term are doing so for career and personal growth. Critically, this places staff development at the centre of efforts to improve staff retention. So if we look now at the career values that we observe amongst staff where we're working, we can see that those which are strong, medium, and weak drivers of employees' decisions around their careers. So today's young professionals have a short role horizon with average tenure in the financial sector sitting around 3 years. stability is no longer defined in terms of employment, but actually in terms of employability. So the career values that we see outlined here indicate that job security has not been abandoned in favor of risk-taking and enterprise, but that it has evolved into a drive for broad employability, maximizing your future options by seeking to widen your horizons, meet new people, and have new and different experiences. This places staff development absolutely at the crux of retention planning. Staff are hungry for development opportunities and will often be so committed that they're willing to invest financially and certainly in terms of their time in their own education. This is a serious driver of retention and again emphasizes the need to place development at the center of retention strategies. So we observe that effective staff development is integrated into the strategy, systems, and culture of an institution. Institutions where this most effectively occurs look at developing staff and take on the following characteristics. So they have a culture of learning embodied from the top of the institution down. They often have, we observe, a human capital strategy, which is aligned with institutional objectives. These are institutions where there are processes within HR functions, automatically identify needs, transparent, scalable, and affordable mechanisms to deliver appropriate development opportunities, with online learning being key to this. And critically, what we see is managers who are equipped and incentivized to support staff development through career conversations, mentoring, and the provision of stretch projects. So online learning plays a critical role in aligning development opportunities with the preferences of staff populations. Millennials, of which Thom's already shared with us are an estimated 200 million in Africa, in particular seek self-managed online learning to underpin their professional growth. It's critical that online learning is designed effectively and blended to support the development of practical skills and ongoing implementation amongst staff. If we look at the different preferences, say, of different populations, here we can see how online learning can be flexed and varied to meet those needs. So if we're thinking about senior leaders, we're looking to deliver high-quality executive learning, which provides industry or indeed international level exposure and the practical skills to deliver their roles. And executive coaching sits here as a key mechanism for delivering this learning. And this can be conducted online via Skype, through FaceTime, WhatsApp, and be very flexible in order to meet the senior leader needs. If we look at the middle management population, here we're looking to build knowledge and the practical skills to deliver their roles. And this is where blended learning programs really come into their own. We're looking at different types of interventions, including online, peer mentoring, and support within the institution to deliver to this population. And as we mentioned before, the young professionals, which, as Thom said from the Parthenon report, represent 75% of the hiring in financial sector institutions, here we're looking to build the core professional skills of this group, and their preferences are to learn through self-driven, social media-based and online learning. And so you can see really how critical it is to engage with the online learning agenda in a way that supports the retention of your staff. So what does this mean for an institution? Let's take an example from an institution where we've recently been working and we were asked to support, where their entire product development team left to join a competitor. How can we think about this in the context of retention? So if staff do leave, someone else is now developing them and giving them experience in a different context. So you could think, when can you hire them back? And which roles might they be ready for? also you could start to think about your talent pool beyond the business. So what is the next role? How could you attract them back? Who are the high flyers in the industry currently? And when might you be thinking of trying to leverage them into your institution? If the pay differential, which is often a factor, if the pay differential is too large, then do you need to look at your business model and your structure? Is the pay deal of the competitor likely to be transitional rather than sustainable in the long term? And have you articulated your full proposition, the financial and non-financial elements of it? There are some organisations, McKinsey is one example, which actively push their staff out at certain points to gain a broader experience and then hire them back later. In this sense, the career path could almost be considered to include external placements. So, to summarise, the approaches that we observe really making a difference are articulated on this slide here. So, treat alumni well, track and maintain the relationships. Also discuss retention expectations with key staff and understand their career drivers. Plan realistic retention rates for different populations into your business strategy. And focus on professional development and career planning as a critical component of retention. And most importantly, we would suggest to leverage online learning to ensure that development modalities really meet the needs of the different populations within your staff. So that's all I was hoping to cover today. I hope this has given you a flavour of the key contribution that we believe online learning can make to staff retention in challenging environments. And I would now like to hand over to Noelah, who is going to share some of her experience at NMB Bank in Tanzania. So thank you.
Hello, Noelah, can you hear us? Noelah, please go ahead. Okay. Please allow us a moment to get Noelah on the line. 1 minute.
Hi, Noelah, will you try unmuting yourself, please?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Noelah, go ahead.
Okay, so the banking sector in Sub-Saharan Africa is expanding, and the growth is attributed by many factors, among which the widening of financial inclusion. And when it comes to the workplace, Tanzania has a diverse workforce. One report from LinkedIn mentioned that employers in Tanzania are looking for a wide variety of skills. And when they look at the top 5 industries on LinkedIn, this is by percentage of total employment in the region, companies in finance and education were found to employ the most workers. Now let me show you, by June of 2016, records had shown that there were more than 40 banks operating in Tanzania. With financial inclusion initiatives such as agency banking, we are seeing a shift from traditional banking practices and agency banking allowing for provisional of limited scale banking and financial services through authorized agents across the country. Now, going to employee development. Employee development is a key factor when it comes to retention. And when we speak of retention, we tend to think of money and bonus and bond agreements. We often forget the other aspects such as employee development. At the financial institution I work for, we're committed to promoting an environment of structured training, learning, and continuing professional development of all employees in order to enable them to perform their duties effectively and efficiently. The learning and talent development and bursary policies ensure that staff are resourced at all times with appropriate skills and knowledge and experience to enable them to achieve the bank's objectives. Now, in my experience, I've seen that staff are more likely to stay loyal to an organization if they are given an opportunity to develop. And when I look at the average tenure at NMB, it's almost 10 years. And I'm a very good example. I used to use myself as an example because I've stayed with NMB. This is my 8th year. And staff development or employee development is one of the key things that actually has made me stay up to this moment. And now let me show you the slide that you're seeing right now on attrition rates. For the last year, our attrition rate was 4.4%. The industry standard is 8%. So I can give you an example. We have staff who joined some time back with advanced secondary school education. And they have developed themselves through our bursary programs to attain master's studies and professional certifications. And for me, these are the success stories that employee development bring in retaining staff. With about 3,374 staff that are scattered across Tanzania and about 57% of total workforce being millennials who are also more into technology, they are fast, they're very fast, and they want a lot of engagement. And this is also giving us an interesting mix when it comes to effective learning methods. But it's also saying a lot about cultural changes towards e-learning. And I've seen that as we're working here, that we have to make use of online discussion forums. We have to put an emphasis on creating communities of practice. And as Jessica mentioned in one of her slides, that with the youth, there is a lot of social learning also going. And this is where I see also e-learning coming in when it comes to addressing the challenges that millennials are facing in terms of improving their skills. Now let me show you slightly of what we have done at our bank. We started the online learning initiatives towards the end of 2013. And the motivation came from the need to have mandatory regulatory programs and later product knowledge programs that cut across the whole bank to reach our staff as soon as possible. With our extensive network, or if I should say spread, of course the option made a lot of sense. There are in general increased trends with employers focusing on online learning as a way to aid staff development and as a key driver to deliver learning solutions. After a number of years, I have seen that staff are slowly starting to appreciate the programs delivered at their convenience. However, the changes of culture of learning and the general notion that e-learning is not really learning is still very strong. And few see it as useful. However, through sensitization, helping staff realize its value and often try to encourage self-paced personal development and the need to self-development encourages them to buy in. I personally think this is an area that most organizations face challenge on, and that's where the transformation and change role of learning and talent development comes in. Well, they say that training equals productivity, and that's also equal to better retention. I strongly believe it is possible to retain staff through e-learning. When you look at the flexibility that it offers, it gives a unique opportunity for staff to choose how they want to develop. There are those staff who would literally go through every course we release so that they have broad knowledge. And there are those who are too into specific technical programs. So if we have our learning platforms filled with specific and broad programs that are of high quality, staff are likely to see the need to stay. In other words, if I see that I have a future with your organization, I am likely to stay. And this comes as an employee, then I have more confidence in my skills, I have more confidence in my competence levels because of the programs that I've been exposed to. And when you look at the slide, you'll notice that I've shown self-initiated, for example, with our bank, staff who have stayed with the bank for 2 years and more, they can actually develop themselves through a self-initiated scheme. Or if they've stayed longer, they can go through a company-initiated scheme. And we have around 20 roles every year that allows staff who are there to follow undergraduate programs, 25 for masters, and 55 for professional qualification. So you can already tell that our appetite is also encouraging staff to obtain as much professional qualifications as possible. But we also encourage the culture of learning and also changing the bank as a learning organization through our own e-library, where we have more than 500 plus books. And mainly and surprisingly, you'll find many people many staff accessing personal and professional development programs. There are also lots of opportunities that we can tap into e-learning. And I've mentioned also about online exit interviews, which is an excellent source of feedback that can be introduced in the future in order to get feedback from our staff. Now, thank you so much. I think this has given you just an overall understanding of how we are doing it at, I'll say, at the ground level. Let me, at this point, invite my colleague Thom Sinclair to speak about the capacity gap and how Getaway Academy offers solutions.
Excellent. Thank you, Noelah. Thank you for that overview of the sector in Tanzania and sharing NMB's experience. We're learning a lot from what you all are doing. And thank you, Jessica, for helping us understand the role of online learning and aligning development opportunities with staff preferences. I've really noted that the key factor of driving retention lies with the FSPs, and we really hope that what we can bring with Gateway Academy will help with some of those challenges. So we're going to circle back to those four challenges and then sort of one bucket of other that we presented in the beginning that came from that FSD Parthenon study. And just take a quick look at how Gateway Academy can support in overcoming those challenges with financial service providers. So first two, if you remember, are time and money, which seem to be the problem with everything. But let's look at time. Actually, let's just go through this. So time, money, and then quality and strategic focus. So there we go. Let's look at time. So the first challenge, of course, is the time it takes to get people to training, the time it takes to do training, the days out of work, the days in the classroom, all of those things associated with in-person training. So one of the things Gateway Academy can certainly help with is quickly matching financial service providers with training service providers in an existing catalog of courses on the platform. Of course, doing online learning cuts down on travel time, cuts down on per diem also, and there are certain other issues with that, but it certainly reduces the amount of time out of the office. We have different types of training. We have multiple week training that is facilitated, and we also have self-paced training. And self-paced training, of course, is just that. So you can go at it at your own time, and it can also be done at different times. If we look at the next factor of cost, Gateway Academy brings an economy of scale. We bring an economy of scale around the platform, access to experts, and that decreases opportunity costs of otherwise being out of the office. time and money are bound together. So a lot of, I think those issues around time are also applicable to cost. If we go and we look at content in terms of the right content for this particular audience. So again, financial service providers working in financial inclusion. We've done a lot of work with these types of FSPs to ensure that our content is aligned with the needs of these institutions, to make sure that the content is demand-driven. We began a couple of years ago with a demand study that Creative Metier did for us, and we have constantly been checking in with our partners as we build these courses, including a workshop that we just did recently in February, where we did some active curation on upcoming content needs. Next challenge is really around focus, and there are many ways you could look at this, many angles. One angle that we took is this focus again on the specific needs for HR and learning and development professionals. So we mentioned the community of practice that Creative Metier is supporting. Through that, we are, of course, creating that network of professionals who are learning from each other and who are supporting each other. But out of that, we also will be building content that's specific for HR and L&D staff in financial service providers. And finally, this last bucket of others. I think that there's probably a lot in here, and there are different ways we could take this, but one is think about it in terms of logistics and all of that, all the resources that it takes to do an in-person training. So it also includes the issues of time and cost. So to access Gateway Academy's courses, you need a device. You either need a laptop or you need a mobile phone or a tablet, and you need access to the internet. You don't always need access to the internet because our content is downloadable into our app, and so you could also view it offline. So it reduces the logistics issues. And also, you'll be able to see the catalog of courses that we have, and that will continue to grow, and you'll have advance notice of those upcoming courses. And finally, I invite you to check out our site, if you have not already, at gateway.academy. There you'll learn more about what we're doing. You'll learn more about why we're doing it. You'll be able to see how to work with us, whether you are a training or a content provider, or whether you are a financial service provider. And you'll be able to continue to keep up with what we're up to. So thank you, and at this point, I'll hand it off to my colleague, Penina.
Well, thank you, Thom, Jessica, and Noelah for a great presentation. So just before we get to Q&A, I would like to pose a quick poll on the experience so far. And then in a minute, I also want to ask if you've not submitted a question or wish to have a comment, please go ahead and submit it. So there are two questions right now. How do you rate the relevance of this webinar to your work? And how would you rate the overall quality of this webinar? And as you submit those, we will then move on to the Q&A portion. So I'll give you a second to submit your response. I also wish to recognize CGAP members and acknowledge their contributions to CGAP's work. So just again, in case you missed the introduction in terms of the Q&A, we have the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. So would you please use that if you have a comment as we go along. All right, I'll take one step back. So we had a number of questions coming up, and Thom, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Jessica and Noelah. Thom, if you would please address the two questions that came from Sergio about the Gateway Academy and the FSP questions, and also Miranda's question on in-house training staff and how they can preserve a certain institutional culture. So I'll give you a moment to respond to that, and then we'll jump on to the next two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Penina. Yes, so just to elaborate, the first question was around the actual market and how we came to the conclusion that it was a weak market that couldn't scale up. A little bit more elaboration on that, and maybe a disagreement that it's the opinion that's a strong, well-functioning at a global scale. So I would say in this particular sector, in financial inclusion, we have found little evidence that there is a strong market. There are a couple of players that do it really well, but there is a great deal of demand out there for financial inclusion training online. Now, a number of our institutions, including NMB, and in our last webinar you heard from two others, Fidelity Bank being the most prominent, they definitely have their own e-learning, and it's robust, and I would say that market works well, and especially when it comes to compliance or maybe even some of the more general areas. But it's when it comes to the specific content around financial inclusion, that's where we find that the market is not able to scale up, that we find that training is almost exclusively done in person. The other question was from Miranda, and I think, if you don't mind me paraphrasing, it was about employers who want their own in-house training and kind of their own branding, and whether we create trainings for intranet. So it's something that we're exploring. We have started to explore what we're calling white labeling, and that's taking basically the Gateway Academy space and creating it for an institution, so it could have its own logo on there, and it can have both access to training on Gateway Academy and then their own training that they can upload to it. So different institutions are different. Some already have their own learning management system, and we are talking about how to integrate that. Some want to figure out how to white label Gateway Academy, so it's certainly an option.
Thank you, Thom, for that response. The next two questions, I'll direct them to Jessica. Jessica, if you could please speak to a question from Sergio about how they can join the communities of practice facilitated by Gateway, and also to the question from Noelah. She wanted to hear more about the executive coach e-learning support and how to ensure that clients would be able to share their problems and fully trust the coach. On to you, Jessica.
Hello. So, sorry, so thank you very much for those questions. So the community of practice to which I referred is the HR community of practice. And this is specifically actually for the 6 initial implementing partners of the Gateway Academy. It draws on a broader challenge which was identified as part of the initial demand research that Thom referenced that Metier conducted a few years ago now. And that identified that there was a specific need to support the development of HR and learning professionals across Sub-Saharan African financial institutions looking to build financial inclusion. And so we have set up and are running this particular community of practice. But I think that there is a question around kind of what the broader needs of HR professionals in the sector are, and we're working with the Gateway Academy team at the moment, and as Thom alluded to think about how those specific needs could be met in the future. So I don't know if that particularly answers your question. It was a specific community of practice that I was referring to. Thom, I don't know whether you might want to come in with any broader answers around the community of practice piece.
Absolutely. So as Jessica mentioned, we've started this community of practice with just a few financial service providers, and the goal is to expand that out. And especially, I'll tell you, if there is interest in this, and we're really glad to see that, then our expansion can happen a bit more quickly, because we do think that there really is a need here. So do let us know in the chat box if that's something you're interested in, and we can connect back with you.
Thank you, Jessica and Thom, for that. So we have another question coming from Julius. Julius would like us to shed a bit more light on the realistic retention rate for staff. So we'll probably start with Noelah, and then Jessica will speak to that as well. Noelah, on to you.
Okay, thank you, Juliet, for the question. And I think it's slightly tricky because there are industry standards for attrition rates. So in terms of Tanzania, that's 8%. And for NMB, we're at 4.4%. And one would argue that is it a good thing when you also don't have people leaving your business? So in terms of that, I don't think that there is a realistic way of answering that, because it also depends on so many other factors, and whether you're still having your top-notch staff there, and if you're having the right mechanism of having your staff to either leave or stay with the organization.
Thank you, Noelah. Jessica, please, would you expound on that and also take the coaching question?
Yeah, sure. So I completely agree with Noelah. What we observe is that we have some data that suggests retention or attrition rates as high as 20% in some institutions that we work with, and with good retention strategies, some as low as 7%. I think the key point really is what's appropriate for the business. Absolutely, in terms of, you know, who's leaving, is it planned in, and how the career development of your staff is being managed, exactly as Noelah alluded to just now. I do think, though, that it's an area that would really benefit from additional research, thinking about what it means. A retention rate is a bit of a blunt instrument, to really get into what this means for achieving the business's strategy. What effective mechanisms look like, what the less effective mechanisms look like, and what different retention rates we might want to be seeing for different populations that take into account different factors around generational preferences, business need, and investment in individuals by the institution. So it's a great question, and I think that it's something that would really benefit getting into in more depth, actually.
Great. And thank you again. Go ahead, Jessica.
And the coaching question, I didn't want to forget that one. So the question was kind of, how do we ensure that when we invest in executive coaching provision for senior executives, that they actually share the full context and example of the challenge that they're seeking? And I think it is a serious consideration. Building trust between the coach and the coachee is absolutely fundamental to the success of any coaching relationship. As is taking a structured coaching approach, which we do through all of our business coaching, that focuses on the performance outcomes that you want to see for the individual. And then it's about assuring the confidentiality of the process and including self-reflection. We would also ask coachees to think about getting feedback from their stakeholders, so they are kind of interrogating their own situation and their responses to it, such that that can then be fed back to the coach in the fullest possible way. To be honest, we often find the challenges the other way, of the person sharing absolutely everything, and that supports really effective coaching rather than holding it back if we create the right context. So I hope that answers your question about that particular piece.
Thank you, Jessica. I'll refer the next two questions to Noelah. So Noelah, we have questions from Sejourn, who would like to know if there's any way most financial institutions can encourage employees as it relates to adequate time for online learning. That's one question. And then the other question from Samson is, how do you get buy-off from EXCO on e-learning, and how can he negotiate that? Please go ahead, Noelah.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. And okay, so on adequate time for online learning, I feel as though it's important to advise staff to find means, perhaps during their working time, either to come in early or to stay along later. And I know that many people would think, why on earth would I want to do that? But it's also a way of trying to push for development, for people to be able to own their own development. And I've seen this is working also with us, because as a bank, we have to open at 8 sharp, and we have to close at 1600 hours. So you would find that their staff would prefer to come in very early in the morning and start on with their own assignments, and then they'll finish up their courses or stay slightly later. But again, there is also another aspect of this, the availability of e-learning also away from the workplace. So for NMB, we have also decided to have it outside the company platform, that staff can also access the platform outside of the workplace, and they can access the contents through their phones and their tabs. And they can also do this as they're going home. They can listen to the audio trainings. They can watch the videos. And this is working more on adequate time for the online learning. So as an organization, you cannot say that we're going to allocate 1 hour or 30 minutes for you to complete your courses. But again, you have that time of the leeway to give them mandates on their own time, and depending on their own availability, to see where best they'll be able to do their online learning. Yeah, the other one was on how can somebody negotiate. There was a question, right, about bio from EXCO on e-learning, was it?
Yes, Noelah.
Okay, so maybe I can share my own experience, because in 2013, when I was speaking about e-learning, nobody really understood. And I would say you should start from economies of scale, because one of the purposes of e-learning, and you see that it cuts a lot of cost when you have a lot of people involved. So economies of scale. So if you're having at least 100 to above, then it would make a very good business case for you to start working on economies of scale of having your own platform in-house. But again, you can also come from the side of cost. So there are direct costs that are related to training, and there are indirect costs associated with training. So indirect costs, these are the cost of, let's say, per diem, the cost of somebody not being there at their workplace, their cost of just people learning. There is a cost to that. So when you want to go and get the buy-in, I would look at all these factors, but also speak to the organization about the need to become a learning organization and the opportunities that are there. So whether it's blended learning, you can reduce the number of classroom sessions from 5 days, let's say, to 3 days, and then have the other activities or sessions take online. And that is a brilliant way of doing it. So I would say you perhaps could start with a small pilot if the economies of scale are there, and then you start practicing. I personally started with a regulatory course, because I knew if they're not going to get everybody trained in the allocated time, obviously there will be some penalties, and so nobody could budge out of it. So that was a brilliant way of showing them that you can actually get all this stuff, complete their anti-money laundering course on time and with no cost at all. And then from there, you will start slowly seeing that people are ready to buy into the idea.
Thank you, Noelah. I have one more question for you, Thom, and the question relates to Gateway's Academy's presence, the languages we have available for our courses, and plans down the line for other regions. So please go ahead.
Great, thank you, Penina. Actually, I'm going to just build on Noelah's answer too, and point you to Salome's chat. I think it's really good advice to also ensure that you have champions in your organization and the executive team who can be your voice within the organization. And also add that not every institution, of course, can build their own platform, which is the economy of scale that Gateway Academy brings. And so trying a course with us is a great way of testing it out also. In terms of languages and places, as I mentioned in the beginning, we started with 7 countries, with Ghana in the west and then east and sort of southern Africa. And you'll notice that all of those countries have language in common. They all speak English, and that was on purpose because we had to start with one language. There are plans to move into French. We don't have any other plans beyond that. Now, we have asked the language question over and over again in the 7 countries where we're focused, and we did get a little bit of feedback, especially in Tanzania, about the need to have some Swahili content. Now, changing the platform language itself is pretty easy. It's the content itself that, of course, has to all be translated manually. That's pretty expensive, but what you can do is enable some things around that content to be in other languages. So you could enable, for example, the discussion board around a particular piece of content to be in Swahili, and you can switch then the platform back and forth. But right now, it's all in English. Plans to move into French and to experiment with some other languages like Swahili.
Excellent. Thank you, Thom, Jessica, and Noelah, and for all the participants for all the comments you've submitted and great questions. So in terms of next steps, I think we'll wrap up the Q&A, and I wanted to give you a sense of what's coming up next. So in summary, first, we looked at capacity gaps in Sub-Saharan Africa's financial institutions. Our panelists guide us through the opportunities, challenges, some considerations and examples of how FSPs are using online learning to address employee development and retention. What's next is we will be emailing you when the webinar recording is ready and the slide deck. Somebody had asked earlier, so that will become available to you shortly on the Microfinance Gateway website. I'd also like to invite you to our website, that's at the Gateway Academy online, and sign up for a newsletter. And if you're interested in seeing a sample demo course, that's also available on the website. I also wish to invite you to our next webinar that's coming up in May, and we'll keep you posted about the actual date and time. So I really want to give a big thanks to the Gateway team and the Microfinance Gateway team for their support in hosting this webinar. And I want to thank our panelists. And above all, I want to thank you, all the participants, for taking the time to join us today. Thank you for your engagement and look forward to seeing you at a future webinar or other events that the Gateway hosts. Thanks again and have a great day. Bye-bye.